Welcome back to another episode of the Top Dogs podcast here on the Field of 68 Media Network. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Mike Anthony, a guy that's been covering UConn athletics for, I don't want to date you too much, Mike, but about 20 years or so. We'll just call it, we'll ballpark it. He's a reporter for Hearst Media Group in Connecticut right now. And you don't just cover UConn men's team, you cover UConn men's, UConn women's. You got some stuff up on Sacred Heart, my guy Nico Gillette, in the last week or two. So if you are a UConn, a Connecticut sports fan, you got to make sure you go and follow Mike. Mike, appreciate you being here, man.
Great to be here, Rob. What's up, buddy?
Not too much. So I got you on here because I want to talk with you about the feature that you wrote on Donovan Clingan, which I believe came out last Monday. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read it at some point last week. It's long. I'm sure that you put a lot of time and effort into that, knowing how long that it was. So I want to talk about that specifically. But before we get into the whole story and the process of it, are you buying this narrative that he grew an inch this summer? Like, is this true? Because they keep pushing it, man. They keep saying he's 7'3", 7'4". Is he going to be 7'7" by the time he's 22 years old? What's happening?
Yeah, I guess he's on pace to be. I buy into it. I just don't know how exact, like to the millimeter, all these measurements are. You know what I mean? Like there's no way that he is 7'3" on the dot. Like, is he a couple millimeters under, even over? Who knows? But he's closer for sure to the 7'3" line than he is the 7'2" line. He'll continue, at least by a recent measurement. You know, like Hashim Thabit was 7'3", listed as 7'3" in college. Then the combine, he actually measured at 7'1.5", or something like that. So who knows? I mean, it depends on the day, posture, tape measure, setting, exactly to the millimeter how tall someone is. But he's more of a 7'3" dude than a 7'2" dude, from what I understand.
It's just
he's tall enough.
Yeah, it's funny to me. What's the difference when you get to 7'3" and 7'2"? I also love, I don't know if you noticed this, but I was making fun of the Marquette guys at Big East Media Day because every single player that returned on Marquette's roster grew an inch last season. If you look at where they were listed last year versus where they're listed this year.
That's funny.
All right, so the Clingan story, I'm going to link the story in the description below on YouTube and in the podcast feeds, but I love the detail that you went into on this for a number of reasons, but I was explaining to you before we recorded it. His childhood and the way that you described him in his hometown reminds me so much of the town that I grew up in. You know, everybody's got their favorite sandwich shop. Everyone's got their friend that's got a boat that you can go fishing on. Everyone's got their favorite little, their parks and fishing holes at home. So, just kind of talk me through a little bit, like the process of putting that together and why that was the angle that you chose for this story.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated and fascinating topic to jump into, right? Because his fame is so multi-layered in this state. You know, everyone knew who he was well before he got to UConn. He, through all the trials and tribulations of a pandemic, had this prolific success at Bristol Central, 7 foot whatever at the time, and growing rapidly, wins a state championship as a senior, develops some level of fame. Then you get to know, even a little bit prior to that, you get to know about his family history and what his family's been through and how they've lost his mother after a long battle with cancer. And you start to think about how challenging that was for him to have lost his mom, who was also a standout basketball player, by the way, as like a 15-year-old kid. And he had like a bevy of options along the way too, to go to different prep schools. He's entering this stratosphere, this different level of recruiting, and he decides to stay at the big public high school, and then he's at the big public university. So when I set out to write something on him for Connecticut Magazine, a lot of what I had to consider is like, all right, well, what am I trying to explain here? And a big portion of the thought process is, well, you got to explain who he is, which means explaining everything he's become and everything he's been through. But to me, you had to find the right entry point and hone in on something pretty specific, particularly at the top of the story, which to me was how much his life has changed yet again in the wake of his success at UConn and as a national champion, and as the local star in the era of NIL. So the first portion of that story, as anyone who has read it knows, is just an exploration of what life is like for these guys. And it's chaotic. It's lucrative, but it's chaotic. And there were points during the offseason where Donovan had to remind himself and ask for some guidance from Hurley and others in his life, like, hey, I'm not where I want to be basketball wise yet. He told his agent, like, we got to turn down some NIL stuff or have a cap on some stuff. I got to keep the main thing, the saying goes. And that's kind of what he tried to remind himself to live by. But that was really the goal, to dive into what's become of his life. And that enabled me to kind of go back and describe his whole life, which is really fascinating for what he's been through, you know?
It's really interesting to see how he is still just like a small town kid, right? He's still just a Bristol kid who just happens to be 7'3" and one of the best defenders in college basketball. How much did you get a chance to just kind of hang out in Bristol and talk to people and see how he is viewed in that community?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Bristol. Not a lot of time with Donovan, though. So that was actually, I'll tell you, as part of the process, like a frustration on my end, trying to spend the appropriate amount of time with Donovan. But I'll tell you also, that frustration ultimately became valuable and rewarding to the process for reasons I hit on earlier. And that I'm trying to explain how crazy this kid's life is. So when I was first asked to write this story, it was back in April, and I was at the NFL draft in Kansas City. And they said, because it's the November issue, it prints in October, goes on newsstands in October. So it prints in September, and they need it by the end of August. Now, this was back in April. I'm like, oh, I have all the time in the world for this. I've known Donovan for several years. I know his father for just as long, and I know his father even better. So I said, this is easy, you know, because I know these people, and I know a lot of people around Donovan in the Bristol community. So I said, I'll knock this out by June or July, give everyone plenty of time to take a look at it and have it sit around and marinate and get ready to push it out there. But I called Bill Clingan, his father, from the Kansas City airport in that final week of April, right as I was leaving the NFL draft. I was like, hey, I know, you know, this summer's going to get away from us pretty quickly. The team's going to Europe. Donovan's going to have summer session. I'm sure he's zigzagging the state for NIL stuff. Let's find some time in May to get together, me, you, and your son, you know, and they were very agreeable, but it just never came together. And then it became June and July and August. And I didn't meet with Donovan until towards the end of August, when, from my perspective, it was a little bit of panic time, as I was telling him and others around him. But again, there was some value in that, in understanding what had become of his life. And there was some value in that, in exploring his life through the perspective of others who really care about him so much and really know him so well. People in the Bristol Central community, spent plenty of time with his father, a lot of time with his high school coach and an assistant principal there, and a principal. Ultimately, I talked to 15 people for the story. I think there was only like 6 or 7 people quoted in the story, but I had hours and hours and hours of interview time and conversational time with people that were really central to the effort.
Yeah, and I bet you're so happy that you spent all of those hours transcribing every single word that they said and listening back to all of those. It's always fun, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and again, it was interesting, like having spoken to Donovan, as he was one of the last people I actually spoke to, perhaps the last person I spoke to in the process. And I hadn't gotten very far ahead in the writing process, because I'm not one of those guys who can say, you know, I'll push back what the entry point's going to be till later, and I'll just start writing what I know is going to be some of the meat and potatoes of the story. Like, I can't start in the middle and then go back to the top. I have to just write and have it come out of me. So to speak to Donovan last, which I really appreciated, don't get me wrong, was a little bit of a challenge in those final weeks, because then I had all this writing to do, and hours and hours and hours of conversation, either transcribed or in my mind or on tape.
So how was he when you got a chance to get with him? Because one thing that I noticed when I was up there is that if you're just sitting there having a conversation with him, talking with him, he's very loose. He's he has a sense of humor. He's he enjoys the occasional F-bomb. I think that he gets that from his coach. But when we got him on camera to record the podcast, it was a little bit more. He was a little tighter. Like he wasn't quite as loose. Well, how was he when you were dealing with him?
He was great. He really was. He's always been great with me. He's also a guy who's gotten used to public life and has become increasingly comfortable, I think, being interviewed, and even and in group settings, you can see it. He's kind of just knows what he's doing now when he gets in front of a group. But I found him to be, as I always have, really conversational. And he and I were talking in a pretty relaxed environment. We were in like an office or a classroom at Bristol Central, and even though I can't pretend to have spent a lot of time with him over the years, or spent a lot of like personal time with him, I've certainly known him for a long time, and I think he has known at least who I am and what I'm about, and has trusted me for a while. So I think you hit on a few things. Like he's a funny guy. He's a down to earth dude. He's for all his nervous restlessness, because there is that aspect to his personality. You can never pin him down, which I spoke to, and he doesn't sleep well. He's up at all hours of the night, but he's a pretty easygoing guy. He's not too high strung. People say he's much like his mother was, personality wise, whereas his little sister Olivia is a little more like Bill, who's a little more reactive. So that's what I came to know about, and what I appreciate about it. I'll tell you, he is a likable kid.
Mm-hmm. He very much hasn't lost that all the NIL stuff and winning a title and becoming like a preseason All-American. Everybody knows who he is, especially in the state of Connecticut. You can kind of tell he hasn't really lost that. Just like he's a big goofy kid too. Like that's still there. You want to keep that as long as you can.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of his ties that remain to the Bristol community help keep him grounded, help keep him who he is. I think his passion for and dedication to some things outside of basketball, particularly fishing, just keep him again grounded in who he is. Basketball is a huge part of his life. It's going to be an even bigger part of his future. It's going to make him a lot of money. It's already brought him on the brink of the world's stage. But he really is a kid who just likes to hop in his kayak at sunrise alone, cruise down the river and fish. And the other thing that's interesting about him is, well before he became famous for basketball, he stood out in a crowd just because of his size. So he grew up anywhere he went with his family being asked, "Hey, how tall are you? Hey, do you play basketball?" Like imagine dealing with that all the time. And never once that anyone knows ever kind of snapping, like his grandmother made him a shirt at one point when he was like 15 or 16 years old that said something like, "I am 6'8". my shoe size is 17, and yes, I do play basketball." I mean, that's got to get old. And now with the burgeoning fame and the additional photo ops and everyone wanting a selfie, and in the day and age of social media, it's not easy to be in the position that he's carved out for himself. It's rewarding. I know he loves what he's accomplished and loves what he's pursuing, but all of this, it's not to say it doesn't come without some kind of burden.
Yeah. So not only do you have this whole small town kid gets famous, comes back to school narrative when it comes to Donovan Clingan, you also have the mother passed away when he was, I believe, 16 years old, right? And that's still a big void in his life. And I thought you handled that portion of it really well. There was a scene that stuck out to me more than anything else when he was, once they realized that he was his mom was heading to the hospital for the last time. He's sitting there petting his dog. He didn't want to watch her get into the ambulance. It just that part of it as well is something that, it's a whole nother layer of this character that is Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Some of it's really sad, of course, and has kind of shaped him as a person. I thought his grandmother, Debbie Perini, was really insightful in looking back on the experiences of Donovan, her grandson, and her granddaughter Olivia. And they're very proud of Olivia, also, by the way, who's a freshman at Clemson and was a good student at Bristol Central and a volleyball player. But Debbie said, looking back, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember her exact words, but something like, "I don't know that they would have been as successful had their mom not passed away." So I think that speaks to the power and the importance of the two of them having grieved and having also, though, been inspired by a woman who by all accounts was really impressive and really kind. You know.
When you are, so I've never covered a team on a beat. When I've written stories, not quite like this, but when I've covered teams and written some of these features, it's been like you swoop in, you're there for like a day or two, you get whatever you can, and then you fly back out. It's got to be different when you are kind of there every single day, right? Like I just how do you handle writing that and then knowing like the next day you got to go see these guys, and maybe it was a little bit different because you were a columnist for a while, and if you write something negative about Jim Calhoun, it probably toughens you up a little bit going in and having to see him the next day. But how do you process that as a journalist?
It's time to talk about Vaulted, first of all. Vaulted is an app that allows you to participate in daily cash prize pools without an entry fee. VLTED. It's the place to store your own bold predictions forever. And by using the Vaulted Challenge feature, you can prove you're smarter than your friends. So go download the Vaulted app, give it a try for free. Vaulted is spelled VLTED, and it's the app to challenge your friends, store your predictions, join daily cash prize pools without any entry fee. Download Vaulted today. All right, so I went in there and I'm going to challenge you guys. And my prediction is that Kentucky does not win 25 games this season. They were a lock to win 25 every year the first 10 years. I think they did it maybe 8 or 9 of Cal's first 10 years other than the NIT year. Last few, they haven't done it. Obviously, they're really bad in 21. Then a couple of years ago when they lost to St. Peter's, they won 26. Last year, they won 22 and 12. Where do you guys stand on this? Doug, are you accepting my challenge and saying that Kentucky's going to win at least 25 games this year?
I agree with you. I think it's more likely than not they don't win 25 games, right? Because remember, like, you're throwing some freshman guards out there against Kansas, Miami, Carolina. It's more likely than not they don't win 25 games. I still think you have a very good year. I don't think they win more than 25 games.
I mean, it depends on the situation, but like I was a columnist for a little while. I was a beat writer for the Hartford Courant from 2005 to 2011. There was a 4 or 5 year stretch where I focused on feature writing at the Courant and wasn't much involved with UConn basketball other than parachuting into a game here and there to write like a sidebar type of story. Back on the UConn scene as a columnist, left the Courant to take this job at Hearst, which gives me a lot of freedom to do some things that do mix in some opinion. I have a lot of leeway, thankfully, but it's largely based on long form journalism and feature writing. So I'm not like the hot take guy, and that's not my strong suit either. Like I was never one that was like, I have this opinion and it's an absolute and there's no gray area. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm also not a huge fan of pretending I know more than I do, or pretending I know more than the central figures involved when you're trying to either discuss a topic, team, situation, or life. So look, the way I go about doing what I do is just to learn as much as I can and kind of just present that in a readable manner for the readers. I think what I enjoy most and what I probably do best is understanding people and writing about people. So I was very much in my comfort zone writing about Donovan as I would be any other player. As I also enjoyed writing about Alex Caravan recently. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, the Clingan piece was unique in its function and in its purpose and in its length. But I think you're always just trying to learn, no matter what type of piece you're trying to do. You're trying to learn and inform. And sometimes that's as simple as being at a game and describing the scene. Other times it's as complicated as spending 4 or 5 months getting to know someone and writing everything you can about their life. But I think the main approach is always the same. What can I tell these people about this game, or what can I tell these people about this person? So if you stay true to that, and whatever comes under that umbrella, that's what I try to do anyway.
Yeah. You also have a story up on Cam Spencer. I think it went up maybe yesterday, but He's an interesting character as well. The practice that I was at, he punted a ball with his left foot, not his right foot, that almost went out of Gamble Pavilion.
See that
So,
those are the details I love. That's
yeah,
good color right there.
yeah.
But yeah, he's a fascinating guy himself, and he's he's funny because he gets to UConn, and I'm familiar with him for having been a good player at Rutgers. But I look
Mhm.
back into his history, I was like, oh, I either didn't realize, I didn't remember he played at Loyola. Then it, like anyone when they join UConn, you start to look like, all right, what else is going on with this kid? Oh, he's got a brother who was also at Loyola. Oh, but wait a minute, his brother was like this kick-ass lacrosse player. Oh, his brother was like the best lacrosse player in the country. Interesting. And now his brother's a professional basketball player.
Yeah,
So that's another fascinating family.
yeah. He's one of the most intense and as hard as on himself dudes as I've ever seen. I think he punched a chair like 4 times. And I
Amazing.
asked the staff, and like he does it every single day in practice. Like it wasn't just he was having a bad day and missed 2 shots and he kicked the ball. Like that is a everyday thing for him. And it's just like, dude, maybe you and Hurley together. That's not necessarily the best combination. All right, I got
That's
a
funny.
question for you, and I hope it doesn't get you in too much trouble. I want you to break down covering Dan Hurley versus covering Jim Calhoun versus covering Gino Ariema.
Oh man,
I imagine
they're
all three are pretty intense.
they're great. They're all. I mean, what more could you ask for? I mean, Calhoun could be combative. Calhoun was great at what he did and a very successful person for the same reason he why he was could be a difficult person. And I liked Jim Calhoun, and he was fair to me. But boy, did he love a fight. And I'm not Mr. Controversy. I don't walk into press conferences looking to stir stuff up. But Calhoun read every single week, and this was like even pre-internet. I mean, not necessarily pre-internet, but it was before every coach was just hopping on Twitter and had access like that to every word. He would have every story printed out for him, so he knew what was being written at every time and considered it very important. And if he disagreed with any phraseology, you would hear about it, which you appreciated, but it wasn't always the most comfortable thing in the world. But again, I go back to like just bringing some color to what you write too. I mean, the guy was so colorful in language and in body language. Very talkative. He never left you with nothing right. Jim Calhoun once walked into a post-game press conference and I think spoke for 8+ minutes as an opening statement and walked out. And I believe gave an opportunity for people to ask questions, but it was just kind of like, well, he just covered everything. So he left the room, but didn't leave us with nothing to write, I remember, nor did he necessarily leave any questions unanswered because he had hit on everything. Gino is to me.
Were you in the room for either of Jim Calhoun's famous press conferences, the not a dime back one, or what was it? I fucked up. I took Karan Butler and Emeka Okafor.
Yeah, that was the Gomes press conference. I believe that was 04, the championship year. I was not in the room for that. I was in the room for not a dime back. Yeah, which was just an awkward.
Can you just talk me through what that was like in there? We've all seen everyone's seen the video at this point, but what was it like being in that room?
Yeah, I mean the press conference. Truthfully, I'd have to look back. I don't remember who they played that day, and I don't remember whether he was satisfied.
I remember it was South Florida. They beat South Florida.
Okay. I remember it just being a kind of a run-of-the-mill press conference, if there was such a thing, with Jim Calhoun, because you never knew what direction they were going to go. When all of a sudden he was asked the question that's been revisited on YouTube millions of times over since. And I remember like wondering what was going on with the question, and then remember Calhoun getting very defensive and angry. And truthfully, you're human too. So like, if I remember what I was thinking, part of me anyway at the time was like, I don't need this right now. Like, again, if your memory's better than mine and you're accurate, they played South Florida. I probably just was appreciating the fact that it was a rather uncomplicated day. They probably won that game by 15 points. I could write my game story as the beat writer and get on with my life. I didn't realize what was happening at the time. So those are really my only recollections of that day.
Yeah, I remember there was one guy because he said something along the lines of, if any of these guys would ask these questions, I just remember there was one voice you hear in the back saying, "Oh, would you please?" And then
that was Phil Chartis.
It was?
It was Phil Chartis, who was writing for the Journal Inquirer at the time, and
How
obviously
about that?
has been the SID for the last 10, 11 years and has since moved on.
How about
And
that?
he was sitting right next to me. Yeah.
How about that? Phil. That's his claim to fame now. You're right, Phil. Good for you, man. All right. So just real quick, just a couple questions. Like, where do you stand on this UConn team overall? I mean, they're obviously coming off of a national championship. They're ranked in the top 10 everywhere. What are you kind of expecting to see out of them?
Sky's the limit. I mean, there's multiple teams you could say that for out there, but I think all you can hope for at this time of year in the sport is to be one of 8 or 12 teams that you can look at and realistically say, yeah, they could win a national championship. And I think UConn's one of them. There's plenty of teams out there that can win a national championship. But I think UConn's one of the 6 or 10 best teams in the country at an early glance. And so you expect them to go relatively deep in the NCAA tournament. And then once you get to that stage, if you click, like we saw that a team can click at the right time last year, sure, it can happen. More specifically, I just see a lot of depth. I think they have shooting for days. I think all that shooting also just creates a nice balance. There's also a balance in experience and youthfulness too, with a guy like Castle and some experienced players. But I think you have enough outside shooters to create some room inside for Castle in one way and some room inside for Clingan in another. Just to kind of come full circle too, the Clingan basketball piece, which we haven't touched much on, is going to be interesting this year, right? Because the equation is not as simple as double his minutes, double his production. Like, Donovan knows exactly what it looks like and feels like to check into a game with his gas tank 100% full and ready to go shake things up and kick some ass. And he knows what it's like to line up against a guy who might look a little gassed. He also knows and will know more what it's like to be out there on the court gassed and have a guy from the other team check in at 250 pounds ready to throw a shoulder into his chest. So there's going to be a lot more of the latter this season. So that is going to be a really interesting development in my mind. How efficient Donovan is. I think he'll make a major stride. I think he's a really good player. I think he'll be dominant. But I think, that's not to say that occasionally there won't be foul trouble or some real, growing pains along the way too.
Yeah.
He knows that.
I've said a bunch of times this offseason that I think the key to their season more than anything else is the development of Samson Johnson. And can he be a guy that gives you like 15 great minutes? Because my big thing with Clingan is the foul trouble didn't matter. Like, endurance didn't matter. You come in, you go as hard as you can, balls to the wall for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, do that 3 times during a game, and that's your job. Now you got to play 26, 27. You can't get in foul trouble. You got to be able to kind of last until the end of the game. So what you can get from Samson Johnson to me will be the determining factor in whether or not this is like a top 10-ish kind of a team, or like, do they actually have a chance to repeat?
I think you make a great point. It's huge in giving them another option and another piece, just Samson in and of himself, but it's domino effect on what Clingan is capable of is huge, because as we've just talked about, those 3 or 4 minute bursts now become 7 or 9 minute stretches where you have to sustain a certain level of play, and that's a huge adjustment for him. It's a huge opportunity too, and he's looking good.
Yeah, that's the 3 things I constantly hear coming out of UConn is that Samson looks good, solo ball looks good, Jaden Ross looks good. And that's kind of like, I don't know if that's just what their talking points are. I don't know if they have like, all right, this is what we need to leak to the media this week, but I hear those 3 things constantly. Yeah,
you hear those things. And it's unfortunate with Clingan's setback with his foot injury. So we'll see, how I guess he's going to ramp it up this week and see what's going on next Monday night. And so we'll see. You can't judge him too harshly on this early portion of the season. Even if he's 100% healthy, we have to take into account that he probably hasn't worked out cardiovascularly to the extent that he would have hoped. So, you just hope for Clingan and for UConn as a whole, you have something that looks like it's taken another major leap forward come February into March, and then you roll the dice.
Yep. Mike, all right. What else do you have coming in the pipeline? What else can you promote? What do you have? Any other features coming down the road?
Well, we just got through I appreciate you mentioning, I appreciate you having me on to discuss the Clingan piece, and I appreciate being able to mention the Caravan piece and Cam Spencer and some other stuff. To be honest with you, Rob, I have some things in the tank that I forget off the top of my head if they ran now, if they didn't. The ramp up to the season is interesting because some of the planning is so long term, and you stockpile stories and then they're rolled out at the appropriate time and or different times, But look, I'm looking to kind of personalize the UConn basketball experience. I work closely with Dave Borges, our beat writer, who's more of the everyday nuts and bolts basketball team stuff. And I'm able to get into some basketball stuff, just like Dave's able to get into some feature writing, but I'm more on the personal side and in the story, in the business of telling stories. So I would hope people just follow along for trying to get to know these players better and these people better. That's really what it's all about.
You did a very good job personalizing Donovan Clingan, Cam Spencer, Alex Caravan, and Nico Gillette at Sacred Heart. We got to give my guy Anthony Latina some love. Sacred Heart, favorite to win the NEC according to the Almanac. So, Mike, listen, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you for jumping on, and I'll just sit here and hope that you can handle a day-to-day with Dave Borges, which is probably not the easiest thing in the world.
Dave's great. Thanks, man. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, man.